had just come home from college for the summer. My mom was thrilled to have me back, but she barely spent time with me. Her work hours had gotten longer, and most nights she didn't return until after midnight. That left me alone in the house with my stepfather, Gary. He wasn't new to me. We'd lived under the same roof since I was 15, but something about this summer felt different. He looked at me too long, smiled a little too wide, and made comments that left me wondering if I was imagining things. First, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I wasn't used to being around him so much after living away for a while. But things shifted quickly. I caught him staring more than once, like when I walked into the kitchen in my tank top and shorts. He didn't look away. He smiled and said, "You've really grown up, haven't you?" That sentence stuck in my head longer than it should have. It made me feel something I couldn't quite name, and it wasn't good. Then one afternoon, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I was in my room getting dressed after a shower, towel wrapped around me, door shut but not locked. I hadn't expected anyone to come in. I was halfway into my shirt when the door suddenly opened. It was Gary. He froze in the doorway. Froze too. My heart stopped. He didn't say anything at first. Then he said, "Oh, sorry. I thought you were out." His eyes weren't sorry though. He looked right at me and not at my face. He stood there just long enough for it to be wrong. Then he closed the door and left. I stood there shaking. That wasn't an accident. You don't just walk into someone's room without knocking, especially when the door is shut. I wanted to tell my mom, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he acted like it was nothing. Or maybe it was how she always defended him no matter what. I convinced myself not to overthink it. Maybe it really was just a mistake. But then it happened again. Not the walking in, but the looks, the compliments, the subtle touches. A hand on my back that lingered too long. A comment about how I looked so much more mature than when I left for college. It was all small, deniable stuff. Nothing you could point at and say, "This is wrong." But I felt it. Something had shifted, and I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore. I stopped dressing with the door open. I kept my headphones out when I walked around the house, just to stay alert. I even started locking my door when I slept. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my mom. I didn't have proof. All I had was that uncomfortable feeling, like I was being watched all the time, like something was coming and I couldn't stop it. After that first incident, things didn't go back to normal. Gary started acting different around me, and I couldn't pretend I didn't notice. He wasn't avoiding me like someone embarrassed by a mistake. He was getting bolder. When we were alone, which was often, his behavior turned more personal. He started asking questions he never used to ask. If I was seeing anyone, if I missed being touched, if college guys were treating me right. He said it with a smirk, like he was trying to be charming, but it only made my stomach turn. One evening I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, and he sat across from me, eyes locked on mine. He said, "You've really become a woman. Your mom must be proud." There was a pause. Then he added, "I know I am." The words hit harder than they should have. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like a compliment laced with something it shouldn't carry. I forced a smile, said nothing, and walked away. But it didn't stop. He started making excuses to be near me. If I was in the living room, he'd sit next to me, close enough that our legs touched. If I got up, he'd follow. One time I bent over to pick something up and caught him staring. No shame. Just staring. Froze. When I looked up, he smiled and said, "Don't be so jumpy." Like I was the one making things weird. I didn't want to be alone with him anymore, but avoiding him was impossible. My mom kept working late shifts. She encouraged us to bond, kept saying, "You're lucky to have a stepdad who cares." I stopped trying to correct her. I stopped trying to talk about it. I could already see it. If I said anything, she wouldn't believe me. Gary was too careful. Everything he did was just subtle enough to stay out of reach. One night it escalated. I was in bed, lights off, scrolling through my phone. I heard the door open slowly. Creak just enough for me to catch it. I turned my head and there he was. Gary, standing in the doorway. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. Just stood there. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Thought I heard something. Wanted to check on you." His eyes stayed on me for a second too long. Then he left. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept hearing the door creak in my mind. I kept seeing his face, the way he looked at me, not like a parent, not like someone who was supposed to protect me. I started thinking maybe I wasn't imagining anything. Maybe this was all exactly what it felt like. A slow, calculated push past boundaries, daring me to speak up, daring me to do something about it. I started realizing that silence was exactly what he was counting on. It happened the night my mom left for an overnight business trip. She gave me a quick hug, told me to be good, and drove off like it was any other day. I stayed in my room most of the evening, pretending to study. Gary knocked once, asked if I wanted dinner, and when I said no, he didn't push. I thought maybe he'd gotten the message. Maybe he'd leave me alone this time. But around midnight, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. He was already there, sipping wine, smiling like he'd been waiting. He poured me a glass without asking. I didn't want it, but I didn't argue. We sat in silence for a few minutes until he started talking about how proud he was of me. How I'd turned into a beautiful, smart woman. I didn't say anything. Then he leaned in and said he hoped I didn't take his affection the wrong way. That he just cared too much. I stood up to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. Gently, not hard, but enough to stop me. That's when he kissed me. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't quick. He kissed me like he meant it, like he'd been thinking about it. My whole body froze. I didn't kiss him back, but I didn't pull away fast enough either. I was in shock. When I finally did, he said, "I'm sorry. That wasn't supposed to happen." But the way he looked at me, it was obvious he didn't mean it. He backed off, went to his room like nothing had happened. I stood there, heart racing, not sure what to do next. The next morning he texted me. "I don't know what came over me. I was drinking. Let's just forget it ever happened." I stared at the screen for a long time. There was no apology, just avoidance. He didn't care how I felt, only that I wouldn't say anything. I didn't reply. I deleted the message. I finally worked up the nerve to talk to my mom that night. I didn't tell her everything, just said that Gary had made me uncomfortable, that he'd crossed some lines. Her face went stiff. She asked if I was sure I wasn't overreacting. Said Gary loved me like his own daughter. I told her I didn't feel safe around him. She got defensive, said I was misinterpreting things. That I always made things bigger than they were. That was when it hit me. She wasn't going to believe me. Or maybe she just didn't want to. I was standing there, telling her something was wrong, and all she could do was make excuses for him. I felt like I was shouting into a void. I walked away from that conversation more alone than ever, realizing that there was no one in that house who'd choose me over him. Not even my own mother. I left 2 days later. I told my mom I'd been offered early lab work at school and needed to get back. She barely questioned it. Gary acted disappointed, said he'd miss having me around, that the house felt more alive when I was home. I didn't respond. I packed quietly, kept my door locked until the Uber arrived, and didn't look back when I left. Back on campus, I tried to dive into routine, classes, studying, anything to block out what had happened. But it didn't work. My mind kept circling back to that night, to his face, to the way my mother looked at me like I was a problem instead of someone who'd been hurt. I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up thinking I'd heard my bedroom door creak. I ate less, spoke less, started skipping lectures. I told myself I was fine, that I had escaped, but it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like survival on autopilot. 2 weeks after I left, Gary texted me again. This time it said, "Hope you're settling in. I miss seeing you around." That message stayed on my screen for a full minute before I blocked him. Not because I needed time to think, because I didn't. I knew what he was doing. He was testing the waters, seeing if I'd respond if I was still silent. Blocking him didn't feel like a victory. Felt like the bare minimum. But at least it was something. My mom never followed up. No calls. No messages. Just silence. I kept wondering if she even cared that I was gone. Maybe she was relieved. Maybe I was an inconvenience she didn't have to deal with anymore. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I kept checking my phone, half hoping she'd text, half hoping she wouldn't. Eventually I stopped waiting. I signed up for campus counseling. I sat through the first session saying almost nothing, but the second time I told the truth. Not the whole story, but enough. The counselor didn't ask questions. She just listened. And for the first time I didn't feel crazy. I didn't feel dramatic or mistaken. Felt heard. That was the turning point. Not a cure, not a fix, but a step. Over the next month I started writing everything down. Every word, every moment, every look. Not because I planned to do anything with it, but because I needed to see it for what it was. He groomed me. He tested boundaries, one step at a time, and when I didn't scream, he went further. I stopped blaming myself the moment I admitted that. I don't know if I'll ever speak to my mother again. Maybe one day she'll ask what really happened, and maybe I'll tell her. Or maybe I won't. What I do know is that silence protects people like him. And I'm done being silent. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't confused. I was hurt. And now I'm healing. On my terms.